This video has been made possible due to my YouTube members, so a big thank you to all the lads currently on the screen. Alright lads, welcome back to the channel. It's currently -4 in the shithole that is the north of the UK at the minute, and I have got a bit of a cold, so I apologise if my sick accenty voice does rub you the wrong way, shall we say. Anyway, today we're talking about the latest slop that Gaijin has added to the top tiers of War Thunder, which is of course the RDF-LT, a tank in my opinion that should never have been added as a premium, and in reality should have been an event vehicle. The tank itself was designed alongside the HSTVL, which we already have in the tech tree, and it uses the same gun and ammunition. The main difference being is the amount of ammunition carried and the ammunition feed or the reload system. You have 34 rounds of additional ammunition compared to the HSTVL, and it also has a slightly faster reload. The RDF-LT also uses a diesel engine, giving you substantially worse mobility compared to the tech tree HSTVL. So for the best part of a day's wage here in the UK, you can get a less mobile version of a free tech tree vehicle that has no advantages in firepower really, but has massively reduced mobility compared to that free vehicle, with the only silver lining being that you can carry more ammunition, and it's not even really that helpful, as the XM885 is basically like firing a hot dog at someone. Anyway, in game the RDF-LT is a battle rating 11.7 light tank, located in the 7th rank of the US tech tree. It does have a somewhat decent lineup at battle rating 11.7, and decent is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. But you can bring along the M1A2 variants, the Squadron AIM, the premium clickbait, as well as several other great vehicles, not to mention the fantastic CAS options the Americans get at this battle rating. The RDF is purchased from the Gaijin store for the cost of $60. You get the tank, 20 days of premium, and 2,500 golden eagles. So with the mediocre firepower, old first gen thermals and very underwhelming mobility, is the RDF-LT a worthy investment of your money, or should you just cave and get the M1A1 clickbait? Well, stick around to find out. So we're going to start off with the firepower, and as you can imagine, the RDF being a stealthy small vehicle that relies on getting the first shot off and always knowing where the enemy is. Now you can imagine that is kind of ruined by the absolutely awful first generation thermal imager on the RDF-L. As I said in the introduction, this tank was designed in the early 80s, and in game your main enemy is mainly going to be the T-80U E1, the Soviet Premium, as well as the Tech Tree BVM and the Leopard 2A7, all of which have modern second gen thermals, which actually gives them better battlefield awareness. On large open maps with many trees where you want to be kind of sitting waiting for enemies to pop out, those much more modern tanks actually have a better chance of spotting you first, as your thermals are so low resolution that when you look into a tree line you really struggle to distinguish if you're actually looking at an enemy. This not only makes it super hard to not only locate an enemy, but trying to aim for weak spots is basically impossible as well. Because of the poor thermals and the rather mediocre actual optical zoom that the RDF has, it's actually quite hard to play this tank as a long range sniper. You'd think that this would be an ideal playstyle as you'd minimise shots being fired back at you, and with the small stature it would allow you to go hold down and kind of keep yourself out of cover, but your gun is very underwhelming at point blank range, so at like 500 to 1,500 meters, you basically are just throwing darts at them. Speaking of which, the gun itself is the Ares XM274 smoothbore cannon. The gun is fully stabilised as you'd expect, and on the stat card it says it has 15 degrees of gun depression, but I think in game it's only got 13 degrees or something. I think I saw a video going over it. It's also worth noting that you can only raise a gun to 40 degrees above horizontal. This is generally good for most things you'll encounter, but if you're on like a tight city map and people start heli rushing at the start of a game, obviously with the tall buildings you won't be able to engage them at a long distance. So if an enemy is right above you, the 40 degrees of gun elevation will not allow you to shoot at helicopters, but you can find yourself a bit of rubble or prop yourself up and give yourself a little bit of additional elevation. The HSTVL itself has 45 degrees of gun elevation, which is better technically, but it's not like a major selling point. It's just the RDF is just worse than the HSTVL in every way, just by a minor amount, but yeah, it's somehow still the same battle rating of 11.7. In fact, the major difference in the firepower department between the RDF and the HSTVL is actually the rate of fire. The HSTVL can fire 60 rounds per minute or 1 per second. The RDF on the other hand has a fire rate of 70 rounds per minute or every 0.9 seconds. As we will see, the RDF is significantly less mobile compared to the HSTVL and only has a marginally faster reload speed, despite being the same battle rating. The main issue with the RDF though, and it's the same issue as on the HSTVL, is the incredibly meek ammunition. The XM885 travels at 1,463 meters per second and can penetrate 276mm of armor at point blank range. While this is good in theory, many Soviet and Chinese tanks are rocking 3rd gen ERA that removes a large chunk of the Sabo's penetrative power. The T90M and T80B VM all have relic side armor, which can basically completely stop your incoming round, making it very hard to kill them from the side aspect, with tanks like the T90M and the Leopard 2A7 being extra difficult due to their side mounted spall liners. This means even if you set up a perfect side ambush waiting for an enemy to drive past you and shooting them in the side, it still isn't guaranteed to result you in a kill. A lot of the time with the Soviet main battle tanks, at least the top tier ones, the ERA on the side of the vehicle can eat your incoming round. They then swing onto you and blast you back to the hangar. As a general rule in the RDF, if an enemy knows you are around a corner, just don't even try to brawl with them, as they can penetrate you anywhere, whereas you have to aim for a very small weak spot in order to just tickle them. While the lower plates are still major weak spots for the Soviet and Chinese T-series tanks, the 75mm dart doesn't really have the penetrative power to kill them reliably here. As you can imagine, a small 75mm Sabo doesn't carry the same momentum as like a 120mm DM53. It doesn't really have the power to go through the lower frontal plate and then carry right on through the fighting compartment and then detonate ammunition as well. So it's very rare that you'll actually get a one-shot kill in this vehicle, but you can just hold down your mouse button down and fire, obviously, 70 rounds per minute, and quantity does have a quality all of its own. The RDF can also carry the XM884. This is a proximity fused high explosive round, designed for engaging helicopters and low-flying jets. It only contains 1.07 kilos of TNT though, giving it a relatively small lethal radius and making it practically useless in the anti-tank role, but it is still very potent for dealing with helicopter rushes at the start of a match. But I wouldn't use it on enemy light tanks such as Beglite Panzers or BMDs for example. I'd still just use your dart rounds. In terms of ammunition loadout, you take 60 rounds into a battle. I tend to take 42 dart rounds and 18 high explosive rounds. This is by no means set in stone the best option, but it is just a good balance for me. Overall with the RDF though, you're basically paying $70 for 34 additional rounds of ammunition compared to the HSTVL. The slight increase in fire rate is meaningless to be honest. It's not like the HSTVL 60 rounds per minute isn't just as strong, and the free Tetri vehicle is also much faster and far more effective at brawling. While the RDF is powerful in hold down positions, overlooking a wide open area, as well as in the late stages of a game when enemies are generally spawning out weaker vehicles, but for the vast majority of situations and on the vast majority of maps in War Thunder, a conventional main battle tank like the M1A1 Clickbait is just going to be more effective for both having fun as well as grinding. The lack of mobility is one of the major issues when it comes to the RDF. It just isn't fast enough to outpace the main battle tanks at battle rating 11.7. You can't get into a strong position at the start of a match, as enemy tanks will literally just beat you to them. You also cannot easily run away if things go south. This means you immediately are already at a huge disadvantage compared to the larger, more better protected and more heavily armed vehicles around you. This brings us on to one of the minor pros of the RDF, which is the small stature of the vehicle. The tank is very low to the ground, which does give you somewhat of a stealthy profile. This allows you to set up ambushes around the battlefield and catch enemies with their pants down. But within this pro is also a con, because unlike the HSTVL that can rush at the start of a match, the RDF really cannot get in front of the enemy team, and you just can't set up those ambushes. This means to me the RDF feels very soulless for the first half of a match. It's just not really got any purpose in the first few minutes of a game where everyone's trying to get to a position. and this tank really excels in the late stages of a game, where the enemies are a lot weaker and have been thinned out substantially. In terms of stats though, we have a top speed of 64 km/h going forwards, which isn't too bad to be honest, but the mobility is seriously nuked by the reverse speed of 10 km/h. This really hurts the tank's ability to brawl, as well as peaking over ridge lines. The Tech Tree HSTVL with its reverse speed of 24 km/h doesn't have these issues. The tank itself uses a very loud diesel engine which produces 350 horsepower. Combined with the weight of 13.4 tons, it gives the tank a power to weight ratio of 26.1 horsepower per ton, which is significantly lower than the HSTVL's 32.5. Overall, the RDF is just not an enjoyable vehicle to drive. It's small, light, gets stopped dead by trees and fences, which compounds the already weak performance to make this tank very grating to play. Whereas the HSTVL uses its speed as its armour, the RDF doesn't have that luxury, instead mainly relying on its small stature to keep itself alive. We do of course have physical armour, but it's made of aluminium and it's only 25mm thick, so there's no way this thing was NBC approved, as its armour can barely stop alpha radiation, never mind enemy SAKO rounds. Like the HSTVL, the RDF's armour is highly angled. This was done to try to make incoming rounds bounce off, rather than relying on the thickness of the armour itself. This was done to reduce weight of vehicles, but still retain some useful levels of armour. This idea has since been proven a dead end, with all modern vehicles relying on a combination of steel and non-energetic reactive armour. It's also worth mentioning the RDF was designed in the late 70s and early 80s, but in game, it is fighting modern Soviet and German designs, with modern spore liners and modern ammunition being fired back at you. If a round does manage to penetrate your armour, then you are almost certainly dead, as the RDF has a crew of 3 men, with 2 in the hull and a commander in the turret. The 2 crew members in the forward part of the hull is a very large vulnerability, as you can be insta-killed coming around a corner before your turret is free to return fire. The last and final downside of the RDF is the lack of both smoke grenades and smoke generators. This means that your armour is awful, and you are too slow to evade pursuing enemies, and you can't even pop smoke to try and hide yourself. This makes the RDF absolutely brutal to play. Just one wrong move and you are completely screwed over, as your 10 km/h reverse speed means you can't run to cover, and you have no smoke to try and throw off enemy incoming fire, and as we've already covered, a particularly angry staple gun can penetrate your armour. Overall, the survivability on the RDF is very poor. It cannot be used aggressively in any way really, instead relying on letting dumb Soviet mains push towards you and slowly ripping them apart with your rapid firing cannon. To conclude, the RDF's battle rating of 11.7 is justified in some small niche scenarios. In the late stages of a match where enemies are bringing out their weaker vehicles, the RDF can absolutely clean up. If you manage to flank the entire enemy team and have their sides and rear available to you, then you can wipe out 10 tanks in a matter of seconds. But for most players, at my skill level at least, this is kind of a waste of a first spawn, and it's just a bad grinding vehicle in general. It's less of a hardcore grinding premium like the T80 UE1 or the M1A1 Clickbait, and more kind of like the Calliope or the Centurion Avery, kind of like a meme vehicle, a vehicle that isn't really meta but does have some like very niche useful feature. And that is basically what the RDF-LT is. It's a very, very good vehicle in a very niche kind of position, really. You need to have the upper hand in every engagement to come out on top, and you can barely damage the average MBT frontally, and your SAKO rounds are about as consistent as a Ferrari pit team, and by that I mean consistently dogshit. Because of this, if you're looking to grind out the US Tech Tree, then the M1A1 Clickbait would be my recommendation at the minute. The Clickbait recently got an upgraded SAKO round, it got M829A2, and meaning it can reliably penetrate the big scurry tanks it now faces very frequently. And while the teams and top tier American lineups are absolutely abysmal, the cast jets are strong, the tanks are solid if you stay hull down and don't play them too aggressively, and we're probably going to be getting quite a few American light tanks this year hopefully, which will flesh out the lineup quite a bit. So while the RDF-LT is a lot of fun to play in certain scenarios, it is just not a vehicle for grinding in my opinion. It isn't fun to play if you've come home from work and you've had a bit of a rough day day and you just want some curve-free grinding, it's just really not the tank for you. Sometimes it feels like Gaijin should be paying you to play this vehicle. It's just, like I said, it's not a firstborn vehicle. It's not something you want to be buying for grinding. It's not reliable in the early stages of a match. I think you're much better, especially if you're a newer player, just getting a main battle tank like the Clickbait or the M1 KVT at battle rating 10.7. As always, lads, I hope you enjoyed the video. And again, I'd just like to say a big thank you to my YouTube members. These videos would be a lot harder to make without your support. So again, a massive thank you to Lola Alphonse, Tans, Deboa LX, Dr. Bob, Tomsa013, Schlunty, Van Halen, Diogenes, Pumpin, Econ, and our two newest members, Minami Productions and Visioned Acorn. Thank you very much for supporting the channel, lads. And if you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave a comment saying hot dogs.